Today we have a special guest, Cantor Debbie, and she is here to share with you her experiences studying under Elie Wiesel at Boston University. And she's going to talk a little bit about her experiences, and she's going to talk about some of the things, the lessons that she has learned that she will be sharing with you. And then there'll be a few minutes at the end for you to ask questions of her. Okay? All right.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Cantor Debbie Gray. I am a fourth generation Cantor. I grew up in Stamford, Connecticut. I grew up in a very musical family. My father was a cantor and a singer. My mother was an organist and a pianist, and she was my accompanist for many years as well. And my father's father, Adolf Kochko, and when he was named Adolf in like 1898, it was a normal name. Now it's associated, not such a normal name. But his father was also a cantor in Kalisz, Poland, and he came to this country in 1922. He came as a younger man, but also a very well-respected cantor. Even in those days, he was a bit of a musical genius, a prodigy, and he was somehow rescued from the things going on in Poland weren't very good, and a relative had the sense to rescue him. Problem is, I think it gave him a lot of guilt, and he never mentioned his family that was left behind. So I grew up thinking that my grandfather was an only child. I knew it was from Poland, so as I started studying the Holocaust and being interested in it in middle school and high school, I imagined that I must have some relatives that perished in the Holocaust, but I really didn't know because I didn't know that I had any family to speak of. And it was only years later, because of Elie Wiesel's classes, that I started doing research. And this is before Google. It wasn't so easy. It was writing letters and letters to Israel and different organizations. And I found out that my grandfather had two brothers who were cantors as well. One in Czechoslovakia, one in Hungary, and three sisters, about 21 singers and or cantors in the family, and most of them perished in the Holocaust. So when I found out that information, being inspired by Elie Wiesel's classes, it really informed me how I was going to continue with my life professionally. I thought I'd be like a folk rock singer. I went to Boston because I liked the coffee houses. I liked the music of Joni Mitchell, Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, Bonnie Raitt. I liked the blues. I liked all the different folk rock bands. But when I found out that my grandfather had two brothers who perished in the Holocaust, who were cantors, I thought, oh, I better continue this family tradition because they didn't have the opportunity to. And that really opened up my mind, and I think it was the classes of Elie Wiesel that made me appreciate the meaning of all that as well. So I chose BU because of the coffee houses, and also because I knew that Elie Wiesel was going to teach there. And like you, I'd read Night, about your age, and it was an incredible book. And I just thought, wow, what a privilege it would be to be able to study with him. I knew he was studying at Yale at the time, and the fact that he was going to leave Yale, which I would have no chance of getting into, and going to BU, which at the time was easier to get into, and that was just fantastic. So now the first day of class with Elie Wiesel, he went around the room, and because there was a fire code, he couldn't accept everybody that wanted to be in his class. When you go to college, you'll find out sometimes you'll be shut out of a few classes just because of the size of it. But he hated the idea of doing a selection. And now that you've read Night, a selection could be life or death. They selected you to get on a line to go to the gas chamber. Mengele selected who's going to work and who's going to die. Elie Wiesel did not like the idea of having to choose. He has an enormous heart. He's such an incredible human being. But he also has to follow some rules sometimes. So he had us write on a 3x5 card, why do we want to take his class? And I wrote, I'm from a cantorial musical family. I didn't know that I could be a cantor because there were no women cantors at that time. I I said I want to help share my love of Jewish music, and I'd like to work with children one day, and I'm interested in sharing my family heritage, knowing that I came from a cantorial family in some way. Didn't know how that could be, but I just wanted somehow to be able to share that. And he said something to me that really changed my life. He said, "My door will always be open to you." Now, I know I didn't say that to everybody, because he let me sit in on all his classes. I didn't even have to sign up for them. And being a bit of a rebel, I was always a bit of a rule breaker, and I always liked alternative things. If something was alternative, I assumed it was better. You know, those were also a little more of the rebellious late 60s, early 70s time, and I always fought out of the box, and I always, if someone said it has to be this way, I'd always say, well, why not this way? I'm sure I was a pleasure to raise, but my parents said I was good. But I always liked to question authority. So I was able to go to all his classes. Even though I was just a sophomore, I could go to his graduate level classes without signing up, because he just said my door is open to you. PhD dissertations, I could sit in on them. It was incredible, and I tried to rearrange my schedule to just take all the Wazelle classes legally I could take, and then all the classes I could just sit in on. And it was an amazing experience. And when I graduated from BU, I would always make a point of going back each year to just sit in his classroom and be there, because he was such a wonderful teacher. He always gave lectures at the 92nd Street Y in the fall, 3 lectures. Then he would give 3 lectures at BU in the spring. And I would really try and make as many of those as I could. I've also written up my notes from all those lectures. And just last year, things have come full circle. This wonderful man, Dr. Joel Rappel, was the director of the Elie Wiesel Archives. And he worked on it for 3 years, and he came to me in Ridgefield and took all my stuff and brought it to the BU library, where it's now housed in the archives. That's another story I'll share in a bit. So being in his classroom was unbelievable. It inspired me to find out who my family was. Now I had a personal connection. I was always connected. Like you, when you read the book Night, you get into the characters. You can imagine yourself in that situation, which is a way to be compassionate, is to try and have empathy and see how would you react if this was you. I always grew up thinking that I would have preferred to have been born in that era, because I like to think that maybe I would have been able to make a difference or rebel or fight back or do something. I always just hated the whole history of it, and I know that there was rebellion, there was spiritual rebellion, there were some uprisings, but not enough. And I like to think that, in my fantasy world, I could have gone back and, gotten rid of Hitler. That's just, childish kind of stuff. But now as an adult, I was given this great gift of information and inspiration from Elie Wiesel, and it changed my life. So the book Night that you just read, when Elie Wiesel first wrote it, first of all, he was quiet for many years. He didn't want to write anything about the Holocaust. It was too painful, and he gave himself several years of just silence and kind of inward absorbing this. When he decided to write the book Night, it was like 3 times thicker. And he slowly pared it down to the very thin book that you just read. It would have been much thicker, but he just wanted to choose only the words that were absolutely necessary. He felt that it had to be sparse, and only every single word what he wanted to share. And he was asked in 1994, he has 2 volumes of memoirs, and they asked him about writing the book Night, and what he thought about it now, years later. And these are Elie Wiesel's words. "My intent here is not to repeat what I recounted in Night in his memoirs, but to review that testimony as I see it now. Was I explicit enough? Did I miss what was essential? Did I serve memory well? In fact, if I had to do it over again, I would change nothing in my words. Logically, I shouldn't have survived. I was sickly, timid, fearful, lacking all resourcefulness. I never did anything to stay alive. I never volunteered for anything. I never jostled anyone to get a tin of soup. I preferred to eat less rather than expose myself to beatings. I was less afraid of death than physical suffering. If anything motivated me, it was my father's presence. He was my support and my oxygen as I was his. And Eloise continues, the SS wanted their victims to see them not as superior men, but as gods. They had all the rights, and we had none. They fed us or killed us on a whim, and we had no right to even look at them. But the faith that bound me to the God of Israel and of my ancestors remained immune to all that. It remained nearly intact. And I just want to share with you a little story about faith and the concentration camps. My grandfather, Adolf's first cousin, Poldy, is a retired Orthodox cantor in LA. We found each other in 2006 by miracle. They were listening to a recording that I was on, and they looked at the name and they thought, Kachko, I wonder if we're related. They had no computer. He wasn't involved in any cantorial organizations, or he would have heard about my grandfather years ago because he was very famous. And he asked a nephew to send me an email. They somehow found my email. And I was just elated. And now we talk all the time, and I go to visit him a lot, and it's incredible. He is a survivor who has taught me also a lot, just like Wiesel. He's met Wiesel. In fact, in the Chapman University, they have a Holocaust library, and they have glass cases of artifacts from the Holocaust. In one case, there's a tallis that my cousin Poldy's father wore, who was my grandfather's first cousin. And in the very next case is a picture of Elie Wiesel being liberated from a concentration camp and a copy of his Nobel Peace Prize. So when I walked into that library and I saw my two strong mentors of the Holocaust, there's Elie Wiesel, and right next to it is my cousin Poldy. I was amazed. But cousin Poldy tells this incredible story. He was at Bergen-Belsen concentration camp where it was just a death camp. And he decided to have a prayer service. And so he had, and you could be killed for having a prayer service, but he had like a hidden secret little Rosh Hashanah prayer service because it was a very important high holiday. And they probably did it in the back of the barracks, and they were denounced by one of the capos that was in charge of this barracks of the concentration camp. And when they were having their every morning, they have to be counted, and they were having the awful roll call. And the Nazi says, I understand there was a prayer service that was held. Who held that prayer service? And my cousin knew that if he didn't say that he did it, everybody could have been killed. So he stepped forward and he said, I did that prayer service. And the Nazi officer said to the person that was supervising, we first told my cousin, there are no prayers allowed here. Prayer is not allowed here. And then he slapped the supervisor because he told on him, and he felt that he should have been, taking better charge of the situation. It should never have been allowed, and he blamed the supervisor. And my cousin was put in solitary confinement for 3 weeks. That was his punishment. At least he wasn't killed, but it was an experience that my cousin says helped inform him because he always had his faith. They couldn't take that away from him. You can try and take away someone's dignity, but he always had his faith. He always believed. He believed that he would survive. And he also, to this day, he tells me life goes one way forward. And it's an incredible lesson that no matter what you're dealing with, there's always hope. Have faith, have inner faith, and know that you can always go forward. If there's a bad situation, go forward, and you can leave it behind. And that was very, very powerful. Elie Wiesel's classroom, and this is from this book, Elie Wiesel, Jewish Literary Moral Perspectives. By the way, there are dozens of books written about Elie Wiesel, and it's worth reading some of them. His classroom became a safe sanctuary for students from every